The lake house was supposed to be an escape, a way for Hailey and me to step away from the noise of daily life and reconnect. That's what I told myself when I booked it. An off-season stay at the same summer camp I had attended as a kid, a place full of quiet trails and frozen-over waters. No distractions, no stress. Just us. But as soon as we arrived, I knew she wasn't happy. While you're here, leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to know. Hailey had never been one for stillness. She thrived in movement, in noise, in the rush of social events. The moment we stepped inside the cabin, I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of disappointment. "This is rustic," she said, running a hand over the old wooden table, her voice carefully neutral. I forced a smile. "It's peaceful. Just you, me, and nature." She exhaled sharply, dropping her bag onto the couch. "Right? Peaceful." The days passed slowly. I spent mornings chopping wood, setting up the fireplace, taking in the crisp winter air. Hailey spent them finding things to complain about: the weak Wi-Fi, the cold draft, the boredom. Every time I suggested we go for a hike or sit by the frozen lake, she had an excuse. One afternoon, as I returned from gathering firewood, I found her outside talking to Marcus, the camp's off-season maintenance worker. He was rugged, the kind of guy who looked like he belonged in a place like this, broad-shouldered, confident, carrying an axe over one shoulder as he leaned against the wooden railing. Hailey laughed at something he said, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in weeks. I clenched my jaw, stepping up onto the porch. "Something funny?" Hailey turned, her smile still lingering. "Marcus was just telling me about the camp's old ghost stories. Apparently, there's a whole legend about this lake." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "Yeah, the locals call it Whispering Waters. Stories say if you listen close enough at night, you can hear voices under the ice." I glanced between them. Sounds like something meant to scare kids away from sneaking out. Hailey shrugged. "I think it's interesting. Better than just sitting around all day." Something about the way she said it, the way her eyes flickered to him, the way she barely looked at me, set my teeth on edge. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, listening to the crackling of the fire, I felt something shift. I didn't know it then, but Hailey was already slipping away. The first rayal crack appeared at dinner. I'd spent the afternoon chopping wood, stacking it neatly against the cabin wall, my muscles aching from the effort. Hailey had barely acknowledged it, her attention fixed on her phone, her expression a mix of boredom and irritation. The lake house was everything I remembered from childhood. The quiet, the crisp air, the stillness of winter pressing in from all sides. To me, it was peaceful. To Hailey, it was a prison. "Did you even think about bringing real food?" she muttered, poking at the grilled fish I had cooked. "Because this feels like something out of a survival show." I forced a laugh, trying to keep things light. "It's fresh, though." Caught myself. She rolled her eyes. "Right? Because fishing in a frozen lake is so romantic." I clenched my jaw, inhaling slowly through my nose. "I thought we came here to get away from everything. To reset." She looked up at me then, her gaze flat, unreadable. "I came here because you wanted to play woodsman for a week." The words stung more than they should have. I had planned this trip for us, for our relationship. But the more time we spent here, the more it became clear Hailey didn't want to reconnect. She wanted distraction. And when she couldn't find one, she turned her frustration on me. After dinner, I stepped outside to clear my head. The cold bit of my skin, my breath curling in the air. The lake stretched out before me, frozen solid, the moonlight bouncing off its surface like glass. I tried to remind myself why I had brought us here. I told myself that if I just had a little more patience, things would get better. Then I heard laughter. Hailey's. I turned, peering around the side of the cabin. There she was, standing with Marcus near the woodpile. He had an axe resting against his shoulder, a smirk playing on his lips as he spoke. She was leaning toward him slightly, her arms crossed, her breath rising in little clouds as she laughed at whatever he had said. I forced myself to stay still, to not storm over there and demand to know what was so funny. It wasn't the first time she had laughed with him. It wasn't the first time I had noticed the way she looked at him, like he belonged here, like he understood something about this place that I never could. I turned back to the lake, my hands curling into fists. I told myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, we went into town for supplies. Hailey was silent on the drive, her fingers tapping against her knee, her thoughts clearly somewhere else. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at her. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just tired." I let the lie pass. At the general store, she wandered through the aisles while I grabbed what we needed. More coffee, some extra firewood, a few snacks. When I found her near the front, she was talking to someone. Marcus. Of course. I stood back for a moment, watching. His stance was relaxed, his arms crossed as he leaned against a shelf. Hailey was smiling, tilting her head slightly as she listened. I felt something sharp and bitter twist in my chest. I stepped forward, ready to go. Hailey blinked, startled, like she had forgotten I was even there. "Oh, yeah, sure." Marcus nodded at me. "You guys all set for the storm coming in?" I frowned. "Storm?" "Yeah," he said, grabbing a small bag of supplies from the counter. "Supposed to hit tomorrow night. Nothing too crazy, just a lot of wind and snow. You want to make sure the cabin's stocked up." Hailey looked at me. "Maybe we should cut the trip short." I shook my head. "We'll be fine. It's just a little snow." She sighed. "Whatever you say, mountain man." I didn't miss the way Marcus smirked. I tightened my grip on the bag, turning toward the door. "Let's go." That night, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows of the cabin. I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my chest. Hailey was stretched out on the couch, flipping through an old magazine she had found in the cabin. "Marcus sure seems to know a lot about this place," I said casually. She didn't look up. "Well, it's his job. You seem to like talking to him." That got her attention. She lowered the magazine slightly, raising an eyebrow. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Just an observation." She scoffed, sitting up. "Oh, please. Don't start acting jealous just because I have a conversation with another human being." "I'm not jealous," I said evenly. "I'm just wondering why you act miserable with me, but seem fine around him." Her eyes flashed with irritation. "Maybe because he's not constantly pressuring me to enjoy this place. Maybe because he doesn't act like I should be grateful for being dragged out to the middle of nowhere." I stared at her, feeling something crack deep inside me. "Dragged?" She rolled her eyes. "You know what I mean." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. "You don't even try to meet me halfway, do you?" She stood up, tossing the magazine onto the table. "You act like this trip was about us, but it wasn't. It was about you proving something. You needed to feel like a man, like some rugged survivalist. Meanwhile, I've been bored out of my mind." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were loud, not because they were cruel, but because they were so casual, so effortless. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I realized the truth. She didn't respect me. She never had. I had spent so much time bending over backward, trying to be the husband she wanted, trying to fix whatever was broken between us. But Hailey had never wanted to fix anything. She just wanted someone to blame. And now, I wasn't sure I wanted to be that person anymore. I stood up, brushing past her. "I'm going to bed." She didn't stop me. She didn't say anything at all. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, the storm had rolled in, covering the landscape in a thick layer of white. The trees groaned under the weight of the snow, the wind howling through the valley like a warning. I stepped outside to check the firewood, bracing against the cold. The lake was almost invisible in the heavy snowfall, the boathouse a dark shape barely distinguishable through the haze. The quiet should have been peaceful, but instead it felt suffocating. Inside, Hailey sat curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through her phone. Her face was illuminated by the screen, her expression distant. She had barely spoken to me since last night. I set down the stack of wood by the fireplace. "Looks like we'll be snowed in for a while." She didn't look up. "Great. Just what I wanted." I clenched my jaw. "You act like being here with me is some kind of punishment." She sighed dramatically, tossing her phone onto the cushion beside her. "Because it is, Brian. I told you I didn't want to come here, but you insisted. And now we're trapped." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "I thought this trip was for us." She scoffed. "No, you thought it was for us. But really it was for you. To play outdoorsman. To prove to yourself that you're some rugged, capable guy." I stared at her, my hands tightening into fists at my sides. You don't respect me at all, do you? She rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go. The self-pity act. Poor Brian, trying so hard while his wife is just so cruel to him. I felt something inside me snap. Do you even like me, Hailey? She blinked, caught off guard for the first time. What? I took a step closer, my voice steady but firm. Do you even like me? Because the way you talk to me, the way you look at me, I don't think you do. She hesitated, just for a second, and that second was all I needed. I let out a bitter laugh. That's what I thought. She crossed her arms. Oh, grow up, Brian. Just because I don't worship the ground you walk on doesn't mean I don't care about you. Care about me? I shook my head. No, Hailey, you don't care about me. You care about control. About always being the one who decides what's fun, what's worth our time, what matters in this marriage. She scoffed. That's ridiculous. Is it? I gestured around the room. I planned this trip for us. I did all the work, made sure everything was set up, tried to make it special. And you've spent the entire time acting like you can't stand to be here. She threw up her hands. Because I can't stand it. I hate this place. I hate the cold, the quiet, the isolation. And I hate that you can't see how miserable I am. I let the words settle between us. The truth was out now, laid bare in the space between us. There was no coming back from it. You're not miserable because of this place, I said finally. You're miserable because you don't want to be with me. Her expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I laughed, shaking my head. You know what? I'm done trying, Hailey. I'm done being the guy you roll your eyes at, the guy you talk down to, the guy you blame for your own unhappiness. She folded her arms. So what? You want a medal for finally standing up for yourself? I stared at her, my pulse steady. No, I want to stop wasting my time. Silence stretched between us. The fire crackled in the hearth. The wind howled outside, but inside, everything was still. Hailey shifted, her expression unreadable. So what now? I grabbed my jacket from the chair. I need air. She didn't stop me. She just let me walk out the door. As the snow crunched under my boots, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees as I trudged through the snow, my breath coming in slow, controlled exhales. I hadn't meant to storm out, but if I stayed inside any longer, I was going to say something I couldn't take back. Maybe it was already too late for that. Maybe it had been too late for a long time. I walked down toward the boathouse, the frozen lake stretching out before me like an empty mirror. The wooden structure groaned under the weight of the snow, the old boards shifting slightly as I stepped inside. It smelled like damp wood and rusting metal, like the past clinging to a place long after it had been abandoned for the season. I sat down on an overturned rowboat, rubbing my hands together for warmth. How had it come to this? When did we stop being a team? I had spent years trying to make Hailey happy, trying to be the man she wanted, the man she needed. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, I was beginning to wonder if it had ever been about me at all. I sighed, pushing off the boat and making my way back up to the cabin. The sky was already darkening, the storm thickening around me. I needed to clear my head to figure out what came next. When I stepped inside, Hailey wasn't in the living room. The blanket she had been wrapped in was tossed over the couch, her phone still sitting on the armrest. The fire had dimmed, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. I walked toward the bedroom, expecting to find her asleep or sulking. Instead, I found something else. The closet door was slightly ajar, and on the floor, half hidden beneath a pile of clothes, was a small, unmarked gift bag. I hesitated. It wasn't mine. I reached down and pulled it out, my fingers tightening around the handles. Something inside me whispered that I already knew what I was going to find. I opened it. Inside was a small, sleek box, the kind that held expensive jewelry or a luxury accessory. My stomach twisted as I flipped it open, revealing a watch. Not just any watch. A designer brand, elegant, expensive. Something I would never buy for myself. Something Hailey had never mentioned. And on the back, engraved in smooth, careful script, to M. Until next time, the breath left my lungs. M. Marcus. I stared at the watch, my pulse hammering in my ears. My hands felt numb, my body frozen in place, but inside, something was burning. She had lied. Not just about the trip, not just about her feelings. She had planned this. She had come here with a secret, with him in mind, with a gift she had been hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to give it to him. I exhaled slowly, my breath shaking. So that was why she had been distant. That was why she had been so quick to dismiss my concerns, so quick to turn everything back on me. She had needed me to be the problem, so she wouldn't have to face what she was doing. I clenched my jaw, closing the box and putting it back in the bag. I could have confronted her right then and there. I could have thrown the watch at her feet and demanded the truth. But what would that accomplish? She would lie. She would twist the story, make it sound like I was crazy, I was the one being paranoid. No, if I was going to do this, I needed proof. I placed the bag back where I found it, adjusting the clothes just enough to make it look undisturbed. Then I straightened, inhaling deeply. The storm outside raged on, the wind shaking the cabin walls. But inside I was still. I wasn't going to accuse her. I was going to catch her. And when I did, there would be no way for her to lie her way out of it. I sat in the dimly lit cabin, staring at the closet where I had just placed the bag back exactly as I'd found it. My mind was clear now, sharper than it had been in weeks. The anger I had felt in the beginning had settled into something colder, something calculated. Hailey had lied. She had planned this. The expensive watch engraved for Marcus, hidden away like a dirty little secret, was proof of that. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. No, that would be too easy, too simple. She had spent this entire trip acting like I was nothing, like I was some inconvenience she had to tolerate. It was time for her to learn what it felt like to be powerless. I needed to move carefully. If she even suspected that I knew, she would go on the defensive. She would twist everything, try to make me feel like I was the one overreacting. I wasn't going to give her that chance. Instead, I was going to let her keep thinking she was in control, right up until the moment she wasn't. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking app one had installed months ago. It had started as a precaution, something to keep us safe in case we ever got separated while hiking. She had even agreed to it. But now, it would serve a different purpose. I checked her location history. It didn't take long to find the pattern. Twice, while I had been out collecting firewood or making supply runs, Hailey's location had pinged by the boathouse. The first time, I had ignored it. The second time, I had dismissed it as coincidence. Now I knew better. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers tapping against the wooden table. The boathouse. It was secluded, far enough from the main cabin that no one would randomly walk in. A perfect place for something that wasn't meant to be seen. I needed to see it for myself. That night, I waited. Hailey was restless, checking her phone more than usual, slipping into the bathroom every now and then, probably to send messages she didn't want me to see. I played along, pretending not to notice, acting as if I was just another clueless husband who didn't suspect a thing. Then, just after midnight, she yawned and stretched. "I'm exhausted," she muttered. "I think I'm going to turn in early." I nodded, barely looking up from the book I was pretending to read. "Good idea. Get some rest." She hesitated, just for a second. Then she nodded and disappeared into the bedroom. I waited until I heard the soft creak of the mattress, the slow, steady rhythm of her fake breathing, because I knew she wasn't asleep. Then, without making a sound, I grabbed my coat and slipped out into the cold. The snow crunched softly under my boots as I made my way down toward the boathouse. The wind had died down, leaving the air eerily still. My breath curled in front of me in slow, steady clouds. When I reached the door, I hesitated for only a moment before pushing it open. Inside, the boathouse smelled like damp wood and old metal. The rowboats were lined up against the walls, their oars stacked neatly beside them. Everything looked untouched, but something was off. I stepped forward, scanning the space, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. Then near the far end of the boathouse, I saw it, footprints. Fresh ones, leading to the back corner. I followed them, my pulse steady. Then I saw something else. A blanket crumpled and discarded on the wooden floor. And next to it, a half-empty bottle of whiskey. I crouched down, running my fingers over the fabric. It was warm. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a meeting place. This was the place. The place where it had happened. The place where Hailey had given herself to Marcus while I had been out in the cold, chopping wood like a fool. I stood up, inhaling sharply. I had seen enough. I turned, my mind already working through the next steps. I wasn't going to lash out. I wasn't going to scream or demand answers. That would give her too much satisfaction, let her think she had gotten under my skin. No, I was going to let her finish what she started. Then, I was going to take everything from her. The next morning, I put my plan in motion. I started with the watch. While Hailey was in the shower, I retrieved the bag and carefully swapped the expensive watch with a cheap knockoff I bought in town weeks ago. It was nearly identical in weight and design, but made of flimsy material that would break the moment someone actually tried to use it. She would never know the difference until it was too late. Next, I made a few calls. The camp had trail cameras placed around the property to capture wildlife. Most people didn't know about them, but I did. I had spoken to one of the groundskeepers earlier that week, who had casually mentioned that some cameras were set near the boathouse, hoping to catch images of deer and other animals. I reached out, feigning curiosity. Hey, I heard the cameras might have caught some cool wildlife footage. Any chance I could take a look? The staffer was more than happy to oblige. I met him at the main lodge, where he showed me a laptop filled with recent footage. Most of it was just snow-covered trees and the occasional fox skittering across the frozen ground. Then I saw it, a timestamp from 2 nights ago. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. The boathouse door cracked open. 2 figures stepped inside, a man and a woman, Marcus and Hailey. They spoke in hushed tones, their bodies close. Then, she reached for him. I inhaled slowly. It was all there. Proof. I turned to the staffer, keeping my expression calm. Would you mind sending me a copy of that? He hesitated. Not much wildlife in that clip. I smiled, shaking my head. No, but I think my wife left something behind in there. This might help me figure out what it was. He nodded and handed me a USB drive. All yours. I took it, pocketing it carefully. Thanks. As I walked back to the cabin, the storm finally settled, the wind quieting, the sky clearing just enough for the moon to cast long shadows across the snow. Tomorrow, I would end this. I wouldn't just expose Hailey. I would make sure she never forgot the moment she lost everything. The morning of the carnival, Hailey was in a good mood. Too good. She hummed to herself as she made coffee, stretching like she had slept soundly, like nothing was weighing on her mind. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table, watching her. She had no idea. No idea that I had the footage. No idea that I knew about the watch. No idea that today would be the last day she would ever feel in control. I sipped my coffee, keeping my tone casual. You ready for today? She turned, leaning against the counter. I guess. Not really my thing, but at least ITLL be something to do. I smirked. Yeah, should be interesting. She didn't catch the weight behind my words. Instead, she rolled her eyes playfully and went back to scrolling through her phone. Good. Let her think she was safe. Let her enjoy these last few hours of ignorance. The winter carnival was held near the camp's main lodge, a sprawling open area where they had set up food stalls, bonfires, and ice sculptures. Families wandered through the snowy grounds, kids laughing as they tossed snowballs, couples sipping hot cider. It was the kind of event that made this place feel alive, even in the off-season. Hailey and I arrived together, blending in easily. She smiled at people she knew, made small talk, played the part of the charming wife. I let her laugh, let her feel comfortable. Because the moment she let her guard down completely, I was going to take everything from her. At the center of the event was a projection screen, set up for a slideshow showcasing the camp's wildlife footage. This was the highlight of the evening, an inside look at the hidden beauty of the woods, the lake, the creatures that thrived even in winter. I stood near the back, watching as the slideshow began. The first few images flickered across the screen. Snow-covered deer, an owl perched high in a tree, a fox disappearing into the brush. The crowd murmured in appreciation, some snapping pictures. Then, the next slide came. The boathouse, a grainy, time-stamped image of the door opening. 2 figures stepping inside. The murmur shifted. Confusion. A few chuckles. Someone whispered, "What the?" I glanced at Hailey. She hadn't noticed yet, too busy laughing at something someone had said beside her. Then the next image appeared, clearer, her hand on his arm, his fingers brushing against her waist. The crowd went silent. Hailey stiffened. I watched as realization slammed into her, her body going rigid. And then, the final image, her lips inches from his. The unmistakable closeness of two people who were more than just friends. A sharp gasp cut through the silence. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Hailey whirled toward me, her face drained of color. "What did you do?" I smiled, just sharing some wildlife footage. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Brian, shut this down. Now." I raised an eyebrow. "Why? You don't want everyone to see your little secret?" Her breath hitched, panic flashing in her eyes. People were staring now, whispering. Her friends, the camp staff, the very people she had spent years charming. And now they all knew. The slideshow abruptly cut off, someone scrambling to stop it, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen. Marcus was nowhere to be found. Coward. Hailey's hands shook, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape. But there wasn't one. I leaned in, my voice low and calm. "You should have been more careful, Hailey. Some secrets don't stay buried, even in the off-season." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I turned, walking away. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I had one. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. The gasps, the whispers, the burning humiliation on Hailey's face. It was enough. As I walked away, I could hear people talking, murmuring her name, piecing together what they had just seen. She had built her life on perception, on being admired, on keeping up appearances. Now it was ruined. I drove back to the cabin alone. The cold, empty silence was a relief. For the first time in weeks, my mind wasn't spinning, searching for answers, trying to justify her behavior. I knew the truth now. There was nothing left to figure out. Hailey had made her choices. I had made mine. An hour later, I heard the tires crunching over the snow. She was here. I stayed seated at the table as the front door burst open. Hailey stood in the entryway, her face red from the cold, or maybe from the shame. Her breathing was uneven, her hands shaking as she slammed the door shut behind her. "You ruined me," she spat, her voice barely controlled. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I didn't move. "No, Hailey, you did that. I just made sure you couldn't lie your way out of it." She took a step closer, her expression wild. "You had no right. If you had a problem, you should have talked to me, not," I scoffed, shaking my head. "Talked to you? The way you've been so honest with me? The way you looked me in the eye and lied, over and over?" I stood up, slowly, letting the weight of my words settle. "You don't get to be the victim, Hailey." She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. "It wasn't serious." I laughed. A cold, hollow sound. "It was serious enough for you to sneak around, to hide gifts for him, to meet him in the boathouse like I wouldn't find out." I stepped toward her, lowering my voice. "Don't insult me by pretending it didn't matter." Her face twisted, frustration bleeding into desperation. "I was unhappy, Brian. I needed something." "No," I cut her off. "You needed attention. You needed to feel like the center of someone's world. And when I didn't play that game, you found someone else who would." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "But it still wasn't enough, was it?" Her bottom lip trembled. For the first time, she had nothing to say. I grabbed my coat from the chair, slipping it on. "I'm done, Hailey. You can stay here tonight. I'll be gone by morning." Her eyes widened. "Brian, wait, no." I shook my head. "You don't get another chance. You don't get to explain, or twist this, or make me doubt myself again. We're finished." She took a shaky breath, and for a second, I almost thought she'd break down, that she'd beg. But instead, her pride kicked in. Her face hardened, and she lifted her chin. "Fine. If you want to throw away everything over one mistake, that's on you." I smiled. "It wasn't one mistake, Hailey. It was 100 little ones." And I finally woke up. I stepped past her, opened the door, and let the cold air rush in. And then, without another word, I walked out, leaving her behind in the cabin alone. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the cabin. I didn't answer her calls. I didn't acknowledge the desperate texts that started pouring in the next morning. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I drove straight home, packed a bag, and called a lawyer. This marriage was over. Hailey must have sensed it, because by the time I officially filed for divorce, she had already started playing defense. She went from rage to bargaining in a matter of days, alternating between apologetic messages and bitter accusations. One day, she was so sorry, please let's talk, and the next, she was, if you think you're taking half of my things, you're insane. It was almost laughable. Then came the real fight. I sat in my lawyer's office, my fingers tapping against the polished wood of the desk as she flipped through the paperwork. She's contesting everything, she said, shaking her head. She's trying to claim emotional distress, saying you deliberately humiliated her in front of her peers. I smirked. Because she got caught? The lawyer shrugged. That's her angle. I exhaled slowly, leaning back. Then let's remind her why she lost. I pulled out the USB drive and slid it across the desk. My lawyer raised an eyebrow, but plugged it into her laptop. Within seconds, the screen filled with the grainy Boathouse footage. Hailey and Marcus. The stolen glances. The whispers. The hand on his arm. The moment she leaned in, thinking they were alone. My lawyer leaned back, a small smile playing on her lips. Well, that changes things. The next meeting was in a sterile conference room, my lawyer seated beside me, Hailey across from us with her own attorney. She looked different, smaller. The usual confidence wasn't there. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her lawyer cleared his throat. Hailey is open to discussing an amicable division of assets, provided both parties can agree. Brian gets the house, my lawyer interrupted. Full ownership. Hailey's head snapped up. Excuse me? My lawyer tapped the USB drive on the table. We can go to court if you'd like. But I doubt a judge will have much sympathy for someone who spent a marriage deceiving their spouse while sneaking around behind his back. Hailey's jaw clenched. That video was private. I smiled, tilting my head. So was my marriage. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Let's remain civil. Of course, my lawyer said smoothly. Brian is more than willing to settle this fairly. He keeps the house. No spousal support. And Hailey keeps whatever's left. Hailey's face twisted. You can't do this. I met her gaze, calm and unshaken. I already did. She knew she had lost. After a long silence, her lawyer exhaled. We'll review the terms. Hailey didn't say another word. She had spent so long controlling me, manipulating me, bending every situation to her advantage. But this time, she had no power. This time, I walked away the winner. The house was mine. The divorce was finalized. Hailey was out of my life. It should have felt like victory, but instead, it felt like silence. A good silence. The kind that doesn't suffocate you, the kind that feels like breathing after holding it in for too long. I stood in the middle of my now empty living room, letting reality settle. Hailey's things were gone. The presence she had once filled every room with now reduced to faint memories. No more passive-aggressive sighs when I sat down to watch a game. No more dismissive glances when I talked about my day. No more walking on eggshells. The first few days alone were strange. I kept expecting to hear her voice, to feel the tension of waiting for the next argument. But as time passed, something shifted. I liked the quiet. I liked that I could think again. I went back to work with a new focus. I reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with because Hailey never liked them, never made time for them. I picked up hobbies I had long abandoned, small things that reminded me of who I used to be before she chipped away at me piece by piece. One night, I found myself sitting by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, watching the flames flicker. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I miss you. Can we talk? I stared at the message, expression unreadable. Hailey. She wasn't handling the fallout well. Her life wasn't the same without me cleaning up after her messes. I had heard things, how she tried reaching out to people she once impressed, only to find that her reputation was tainted. How Marcus had disappeared the moment things got complicated. How she was struggling. I took another sip of my drink, letting the warmth spread through me. Then, without hesitation, I deleted the message. I didn't need to talk to her. I had nothing left to say. And for the first time in years, my life finally belonged to me. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.